The governor likes to say technology is great when it works.
Amen. Mr. Stone, good afternoon. So far we have you, Julie Ruskin, Rep Ortiz, and in for the LG is Mark. I'm just giving it a few minutes to see if we get more folks on this lovely Monday afternoon. Folks, I'm trying to walk this balance of respecting all of your time who got on time and the importance of having a meeting with as many voices as we can. It's 3:33. I'm going to give it 2 more minutes. And at 3:35, I'm going to go ahead and start the conversation with those of us who are on the line. Okay, I see we've got Kirsten back on now, and I am reminded that Ms. Moran gets a pass. She is in Buenos Aires at the World Congress on adult capacity. So we agreed she did not need to be calling in from Buenos Aires. That said, we've got a few members who it looks like can't join today. I'm going to dive us right in, and I will tell everyone up front, I've had conversations with several of you since the time we set out the agenda. And based on that, it felt like we needed to do a more grounding conversation rather than just spending time kind of checking the box on where everything is. So what I'm going to do is give a recap of where in the big picture the recommendations, or excuse me, the ideas are coming out of each subcommittee, what the kind of the big buckets and themes of those are, talk a little bit about what process remains on those. Teaser, the good news is we are very much on track with those. And then I want to talk more about philosophically and from a values perspective, how you as the executive committee want to approach your role in receiving those recommendations and turning them into the report that will ultimately go forward. With that, I will pause just a moment since we are being live streamed on YouTube and may have members of the public there. Just a reminder that if you are a member of the public who would like to join this conversation, we welcome public comment at the end of each meeting, including this one. We would ask at that time that if you're on YouTube or another streaming app, we're going to need you to jump over to the Zoom site. We would ask that you leave your camera off until it's time for public comment and drop a chat to either Carrie Steele or myself, Barrick Abramson. And on the note of the chat, I do ask all members to refrain from using the chat unless it's something you need to share directly with me. That chat can just be a distraction, certainly for those using a screen reader. And frankly, it's a distraction for the rest of the group trying to have a conversation focused on one another. So we try to minimize that. With that, last reminder, I'll just ask each member, for the benefit of those who may be catching this later, to introduce yourself by full name the first time you speak, and at least by your first time each time that you do speak. With that, let me kind of ground in where we are with the idea generation. We are very much on track. Each committee has been going through the tasks and the charges given to them. The government committee has talked about running for and serving in elected office. They've talked about being employed by government. They've talked about participating in public government and public discussions, and they'll have one more conversation about accessing government services. We've had some ideas brought forward to us by Julie, by Chanda, and some others that raised questions around accessing very specific types of services, particularly around medical. So we're having some conversations there that are split in between that and the CADA Rewrite Committee. On the CADA Rewrite Committee, they have gone through and had conversations to generate ideas around emotional distress, around caps and damage caps, around exhaustion of administrative remedies, around caps and types of damages. They've started their conversation around some additional ideas they've discussed, things like off-duty use of cannabis under a medical prescription by Coloradans with disabilities, and they have an ongoing conversation about definitions that will need changing. In the Housing Committee, as you all know, they've had conversations and put forward ideas around contracts, around publications and communications. They've had conversations around data, most recently around funding, and they're continuing those conversations and sharing those ideas. The Outdoor Subcommittee, after starting to talk about it by very specific type of recreation, we've expanded that with kind of building on top of all of those. We started about snow sports and mountain resorts. We moved into talking about aquatic and then trails, and really identifying ideas that go across all of those. I'll get in just a minute to what some of the sticky issues are, so you're all aware and have the opportunity to weigh in now if we want to have a discussion, as well as to jump on the calls with those committees, which I know Mr. Stone and Mr. Ortiz and Julie have, as well as the Lieutenant Governor. Where we are is the first couple of sets of ideas are on Engage Dora from the Government Committee, the Rewrite Committee, and the Housing Committee. On Outdoor Rec, we made a decision as a group, because so many of the ideas applied across types of recreation, that we would get through one more meeting, which was last week, and we'll be putting the next batch of ideas from each committee up on the website over the next 10 days. And all of those outdoor recreation ideas to date will get up as well. At the end of today's conversation, we'll also talk about how we're going to tap all of you to help with some of the stakeholder engagement. The intention now is we'll have all of the ideas from each of the subcommittee, up on Engage Dora, and be soliciting that stakeholder input, which the members are working to drive. We're also going to ask for your help. Our September meetings for each committee is now then going to be about processing and discussing the stakeholder feedback they get on those ideas, and using the September and October meeting to turn ideas into recommendations. And whether that's refining and revising the ideas they've generated, prioritizing or shortening those lists, and getting those ready to get all of you a report end of October, early November with their ideas. In general, two things to note. One, they're talking about bringing these ideas to you in the frame of, number one, identifying the problem that each idea, or by the time you get it, a recommendation, is working to solve. Why is there a need for action? Number two, they will be discussing the ideal end state for those that the change is working to improve conditions. There will also most likely for a lot of these be a sequencing of things, the immediate steps to take, but a lot of that we're really looking to bring to all of you. With the subcommittees having spent the last 10 months discussing what the problem is and what the end state is, they'll bring these recommendations, and it's going to fall to the executive committee to really get in the weeds on them. Before I pause for some questions, what I want to do is share kind of the big themes we're seeing across all of these. They're really fitting into three big streams of ideas and then some more specifics. Number one is compliance and enforcement. A big theme across nearly every conversation is there's a law that should require it, but 34 years later, nobody's doing it. Or even we addressed that in CATA more recently, and it's still not happening the way it should. So a lot of ideas have been generated and recommendations are going to come to you about stronger enforcement compliance across the board. Number two, we're talking a lot about the need for information to be in more people's hands, whether that's the general public, whether that's industry people like developers or recreation private sector operators, or even some in government. People getting more information about both what's required and about programs that do exist. The third big theme we're hearing in a lot of these is the need for the government to play an even more proactive role, not just in the compliance and enforcement side, but in the navigation, in the information providing. So things like the government providing a one-stop resource in multiple accessible formats of information about outdoor recreation. Things like almost a color-coded guide, like we think about with ski resorts. So you're going to see ideas and recommendations in those areas. Enforcement of what should already be happening. Ways to educate the public, the private sector, and government officials on what's expected and on programs that exist, and then general public education. I don't want you to think it's just limited to that because there are a lot of new ideas in there. Things like accessible parking that takes into accommodation unloading of adaptive equipment or the use of vans that need to unload. There's going to be a lot of specific ideas for the roles of government in ensuring everything from accessible venues for candidate forums to making sure that we're spending appropriately to get buildings fully accessible. I think from all of these, you will also see some pretty new ideas in the CATA rewrite subcommittee that fall outside of enforcement, education, and navigation. Those are things like recommending the availability of emotional distress damages, removing caps, and making the exhaustion of administrative remedies optional. I know that's kind of a broad paint, but I also know that many of you have been joining the conversations and you've had online access to the ideas. I wanted to preview for you kind of the big themes. I want to spend most of today talking to you about how you and an executive committee want to approach the next phase of your work. But before I do, I want to pause both for questions and for each of you who have been on some of these calls to weigh in and offer your perspective of what you've heard and what you're seeing in the ideas being generated. And I won't start with a roll call. I'll start with volunteers before I volunteer. Rep Ortiz, you've been there for most of them, and I don't have Michael Stone at his desk right now, which means I'm going to call on you while I've got you away from special session.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really awesome to see these subcommittees go from outside of the CATA rewrite, where I had very strong concerns, to where they really have grown and come into their own. That's in no small part to the work that Carrie and Barrick have brought to bear, and making sure that we're keeping everybody on task and focused. So it's been really great to see them grow into their roles and the ideas that they're coming up with. This work is so critical. And then because right now, we're going through special session, and I just got to give these examples of why this work is so critical. I asked for ASL interpretation because we're talking about bills that are going to impact people's property taxes. And the line that I got told was, we're not legally required by law to do that. It is, and excuse my French, I'm just going to say it, it is fucking exhausting. It is exhausting when there's laws on the books and you are trying to utilize services and you are met with, well, we aren't legally required to do that unless someone with a specific disability asks for it, which is such horse crap, as if the general public can't tune in all the time to find out about their property taxes, as if people with disabilities aren't homeowners, right? If it was, we will try, my attitude would have been completely different, but to be met with that was absolutely unacceptable. Let's start with that. Not to mention bringing a bill forward to try and incentivize, because, we hear business community that they're tired of the mandates. So we presented a bill today that was trying to incentivize giving tax cuts for new developments. So we're not cutting current existing county or city budgets. We are just limiting the growth per se, but by also trying to get them to go above and beyond what currently exists for accessible housing. And so what I want to do as a part of that is requesting a demographic note. And because of the way the law is written, they technically don't have to provide demographic notes for special sessions, which is an oversight on the original drafters part, but also ridiculous again. Like this is the type of stuff that I'm talking about and why the work of this task force is so important. And it's just absolutely exhausting to try and utilize even what's already on the books just to be obfuscated or told no right off the bat. Not even a we will try, but being told that right off the bat, which shows why this work is so important. So again, like really great work done by a lot of the subcommittees. There are individual members where it just drives me nuts to hear the same old ableist talking points, whether it's, oh, if we do this, then businesses won't come to Colorado, which is utterly ludicrous because that is what we've been told since the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s and now still. So just really think that it's, and this is going to speak to what I think our role is. They're doing great work, but it's going to still be our role to take the raw materials that they give us and to decide whether we want to move it forward or not. And I'm going to be supportive of us fine-tuning it because we might have experience here, whether it's advocates that have been doing this for more years than I've been disabled, or whether it's legislators that have actually been legislating, to be able to fine-tune and tweak the recommendations that are coming from the task force. So really want to push that not only should it be our role to vote up or down these recommendations or move them forward, but if we do choose to move them forward, but there's little tweaks that we want to make or recommendations that we want to make to give it the best chance of being implemented, that I think that's our role. And I'm also going to step a step further and say, if we have our own recommendations outside of what the subcommittees have done, I think we should be allowed to do that as well. So that's what I have to say about why this work is necessary and what I'd like to see our role continue to be. And also just expressing gratitude for Carrie and Barrett, because they've been a huge part in getting some of these subcommittees I had strong concerns about really into an amazingly good place. So great work to you two. Great work, subcommittee. It's been great to be a part of and watch y'all grow into your work.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz, and I appreciate the kind words. Most of all, thank you for creating this task force. That gives the opportunity for not just Carrie and I to facilitate, but for the state of Colorado to get it right. And you've teed up what will be a lot of our conversations. For those who weren't on the call, there was one member who made a comment that I thought was particularly powerful. She said, I am younger than the ADA and have been able to make an entire career out of trying to enforce what is already in it. And I think that speaks to Rep. Ortiz's point there. Michael, I would love your thoughts on what you're hearing in these committees and the themes, if any, that have stood out to you before we go into a discussion about how the exec committee. But you've heard a lot of the back and forth, and I'm curious your take on it.
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. First off, I apologize for stepping off camera. I was just off to the side. I forget that many of you people can see. So I was just stretching my back. I promise I will never leave the call once I'm on. A couple things. And one thing to Rep. Ortiz comment about the ASL interpretation and the floor. It's a continued problem when you guys are in session. I in fact, when I was at the Capitol for my hearing for the Colorado School for Deaf, being on the school board for the Colorado School for Deaf, and I was sitting with our superintendent who's deaf, and she could not follow. And it was interesting because what we were listening to is the deliberation for mental health and primarily for students. It was absolutely useless for her to be there whatsoever. So just so you know, it's an ongoing problem day to day. So it's another thought. Another thing, also a little addendum to that statement about that subcommittee member who made that comment about her age relative to the ADA and how she made a career. She also stated and multiple times, and there was some consistency about because she's an ADA specialist, she was very specific to kind of going back and forth pros and cons of certain talks. And every time we came to the word compliance, she said, compliance? No, there's no compliance there. And that was the consistent theme as well. And then it speaks also to what I really like how you teed this up, Eric, because specific to the consistent themes. And I think I'd like to pay attention to that, and if you can, keep those notes that you have handy on it, because I think therein lies, recommendations or not, that it's almost a bit of guidance with these experts that we have brought on, and or opinions, because I do believe that there is enough consistency for us to kind of always refer back to. The other thing that I really like in the spirit of that, the consistent themes, are those two E's that you mentioned: education and enforcement. That is a continuing theme, and I think it will always be that way. And I do believe that is something that we have to be very, very conscious of all the time. And obviously, that therein lies the failure of why we are in fact having some of these challenges. The other theme that does come up, and specific to Rep. Ortiz comments about the ableism that we see, is also a comment, is when, and this is a challenge when we're trying to solve for a lack of a better word, the opposition's problems. I think if we hold true to what the mission is and make that statement, we can build on that. Therein lies the enforcement. If, for example, as soon as someone makes a comment saying, "Well, we are not legally obligated," well, therein lies a huge problem. Whether or not they are legally obligated or not, you do these things because it's the right thing to do. That's where compliance and complacency, to me, equate, and it's a huge problem that I'd love to hear what my colleagues have to say on that subject. That said, the progress that has been made within these subcommittees has been incredible. There was one challenge, and I think we've talked about this a little bit in the housing committee. We had the Kelsey group give a presentation, and in the presentation, I think there was a comment specific to universal design, and how in the Kelsey group's model, that's somewhat beneath their objectives. It was a bullet point to this. I think in many ways what they meant to say, that perhaps the ADA might be beneath it, which is consistent with what this committee has been saying from the beginning, how the ADA is a floor, and obviously we're raising the ceiling here, as making it closer to what the need might be. I definitely would love to see the concept of universal design highlighted more and more through our progress. In some of the areas where we might be having challenges with when there is pushback, I'll be curious to see how we are going to move forward on that as a group. And I am looking forward to, like, as you said, as a regrounding, to really hear where everybody might stand, even philosophically, on this. For me, it's as simple as trying to leave this world a better place than we found it. Most of us bring a lived experience, and each of us could, if we can talk all day what that feels like in our world. Many of us have these solutions. The work, as Rep. Ortiz says, that's so vital here, that's exactly what it is. This is our legacy. This is our one chance. And in my lifetime, this is the only time that I'm aware of having this opportunity to actually do good for our current population, of course, future generations, because it's that people that didn't necessarily ask to be here found themselves in a very unique situation, and really are looking towards us, whether they realize it or not, to make those decisions for them today, to make this world a better place. And I think we all have ideas how to get there, and I'm very excited to hear more about that progress. And hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you, Michael. And you and Rep. Ortiz have teed up the conversations we'll spend the bulk of our time, which is what is success and how are we approaching the balance of aspiration and pragmatism. And I'm going to look to all of you for where we land on that spectrum. And in full transparency, I will tell you, not only have I enjoyed the conversations and the push on universal design, my table now has 2 new books on universal design and a pocketbook guide so that I can be a better facilitator and advocate as we go through this. Julie, I would love your thoughts on both the themes I shared and the conversations you've heard that you've been able to drop in on.
Thanks. Good discussion. To be honest, I've 2 of the subcommittees I've followed the most, which is rewrite and government. I've not followed as much housing or outdoor, but and the discussions have been great. I guess and again, I echo Representative Ortiz's comments and Michael's about your great facilitation. It's someone who facilitates a lot of meetings. I'm very impressed. And I'm usually the first one criticizing because I do it a lot too. So it's very impressive. The one thing I guess I'm a little concerned about is I'm not hearing pushback. Everyone's agreeing, and I don't want to get to session, I'm thinking mostly of the rewrite bill, and then have, communities come in and say, oh, well, we were just, oh, this will put us all out of business, or, or here, local governments or the state government saying, well, if we allow online meetings, it's going to cost us $1 million or whatever. So I'm just a little concerned that people aren't saying that we're not hearing from the opposition. And I've not done a deep dive on the DOOR website to see if there's public comment and what that might be, or if we're getting any or not. I feel like, I know we've put it out. I just don't know if people are diving in and providing comment. So that's like what I'm most worried about right now. I love the discussions. I, of course, agree with where things are going. Again, particularly, I really like the deep dive on the going through the stages of employment that the government committee, because we definitely want more people with disabilities having jobs in government. I liked the discussion and the rewrite about let's just plop the regs into the law in Colorado, because I think that is our best protective factor. And it's harder to change a law than a reg. Or even if we get it in Colorado regs, but to get what we have federally in the law, again, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So I like all the ideas. I don't want to, we're going through all of this effort and time, and expense of like having this big open process. And I'm concerned that I don't want us to be in a situation where people choose not to participate and then come and say this is a problem, because I feel like we're being as open as humanly possible. But so that's, I don't know, I don't have an answer, but that's my concern.
Julia, I appreciate that. And I will tell you, those concerns are the very reason that I made the decision to kind of shift our agenda today to really focus on how you want to approach the ideas we're generating on that spectrum of aspiration and pragmatism and the stakeholder engagement. I've been saying, back to the spring, my job with all of you is not just to make sure we get the most powerful ideas, but that we stress test them wherever we can to try to surface that. So we're going to be talking about that as part of today's conversation, because the input, I don't want to get ahead of myself in the discussion, but the input has been limited, and we need to get it greater. We've had the chambers on, we've had CML engage, the Colorado Municipal League. I'll talk about that in about 20-30 minutes when we get to that, but I want you to know I share your concerns, and they're very much on our radars. I'm going to go to Mark and then Rep. Ortiz, and for full transparency to everyone, because we knew the LG wouldn't be able to join today, I took some time at the end of the week for Mark and Josh and I to connect so that they knew what we were going to be discussing and could get the LG's thoughts coming in. So Mark, let me go to you, and then Rep. Ortiz, and then Ms. Becca, if you're available to jump in, would love your thoughts. Mark, to you.
Great. Thanks, Barrick. And this is Mark Honan. I serve as Chief of Staff to Lieutenant Governor Primavera. First, just really appreciate the conversation and dialogue thus far today. And would be remiss if I also didn't kind of share Lieutenant Governor's feedback that she's provided on the subcommittees to date as well. That very much so echoes, of course, what Representative Ortiz and Julie and Michael have been speaking to about just her, how impressed she's been with the conversations and the directions that the subcommittee members have been going. Would also kind of then lift up the comment, I think exactly to Julie's point, of Lieutenant Governor has kind of shared since the beginnings of these conversations about very much so kind of that significant priority of how are we ensuring that we're engaging as many folks as possible on this to get broad representation and feedback and ideas, kind of engaging with the feedback of the subcommittees. So I know for Lieutenant Governor, our office has been spending quite a bit of time in various meetings and engagements that Lieutenant Governor has had, lifting up and trying to share the opportunities to provide that public feedback. So again, Barrick, really excited by, like you're speaking to the information being out there on the Engage Dora website, and being able to leverage the September and October meetings to have those conversations, to keep having it. But just wanted to kind of really share. I know that Lieutenant Governor's been trying to help with that same piece of making sure that there's a broad opportunity for feedback to ensure that we can exactly get to Julie's point. So really interested into the rest of the conversations today about some of those other ideas that my esteemed colleagues have for that discussion of how to best do so. But I know that that's been as a priority for Lieutenant Governor since the beginning of this, is really ensuring that we had that broad representation across the state, and especially as we're now coming into this stage of the process. So just really appreciate, Julie, that feedback and that importance of how we're making sure that we get this information out. But we'll pass over to Barrick, back to yourself, or the representative.
Thanks, Mark. Representative.
Thank you, and I appreciate Julie really lifting that up, because that is going to be. I mean, we know how this game goes. That is exactly what's going to happen. Is that we're going to do all this work and create all these opportunities for people to be involved, to the point where like even Barrick and Carrie are reaching out to people that subcommittee members are recommending and doing extra footwork on their end. And then what's going to happen is when we propose bills in the legislature, these stakeholders are going to come out of the woodwork and talk about how they weren't conferred, how this is going to destroy business, all of the same BS that always happens. And so my ask of this group is, what should we do then? Like, is there something that we can do? And the only thing that I can think of, and maybe you guys can massage this or think about something else completely different, is creating as a part of the report something like a fact sheet or a one pager that we send to the legislature, the gov, and the courts, talking about total hours that were invested in this task force, individual hours that were invested from Barrick and Carrie to the subcommittees to the executive committee members. Talk about the total number, the number of regions that were represented, the number of orgs that were represented, the number of orgs that were conferred with. So I hope you guys have a running list of who you've been reaching out to, whether it's Peter Axelson or others. Like just to and then the different platforms that you could live participate on or find information on, to create a picture that there was every opportunity for these stakeholders to get involved. If they chose not to get involved, that is because that says more about their viewpoint of this task force and about folks with a disability, and whether it's important enough or not for them to invest the time or not. And guarantee you that they're only going to start paying attention when their direct bottom line or when they are directly impacted by it. Guaranteed, because that's always how it goes. But this task force needs to talk about, the executive committee task force needs to talk about, what are we going to do to mitigate that? What are we going to do to show the work that we've done and the effort that we put in to try and engage everybody? So if and when that will inevitably happen here at the Capitol, how my colleagues can lift up that sheet and be like, where were you? Where were you?
Representative, thank you. And two thoughts in response to that. I guess three, actually. One, although we don't have time today, my intention is that on our next call, we have a dedicated strategy conversation. I have seen far too many of these task forces and work groups follow what I call the publish and praise strategy, where they write a beautiful report that gets put on in a binder on a shelf somewhere, and they hope someone does something with it. I have no intention of that being the case here. We absolutely will take your guidance and have an entire section and probably an even more detailed appendix about the outreach and engagement opportunities that were on the table. And then I would just say, I know that to the extent that sometimes it frustrates people, I am and have been and will be unwaveringly neutral in this, which means I am also fully prepared to, in a very neutral and loud voice, tell any committee, any legislator, any body, or any press exactly how neutral and open these conversations were to allow anybody to participate. It's why we take the approach we do. But Representative, I completely agree with you. We need to have that conversation as a group to make sure there is alignment on messaging. I think in addition to writing this report, there is an entire body of conversations to have around the strategy for taking these ideas and making sure they turn into action. So I appreciate you reminding us of that.
Last thing I'll say is there needs to be probably a discussion to incorporate these findings into built-in structures for these departments. Like for us in the legislature, it'd be the SMART Act committee hearings, right? That is something that is heard by the public, that the legislators or the committee that it would go before has to listen to and has to weigh in on. And they're kind of create greater accountability that this just wasn't a report that was put on someone's desk and ignored, that, you know, that you heard the report, you were allowed to ask questions about it and to hold people further accountable, right? So just going to throw that out there, but I'll take my seat.
Understood. Kirsten, anything you want to offer on the themes that I shared, or any of the conversations you've heard?
I think the only thing that I would add is I feel like it would be really helpful if we had a one-pager of what the actual ideas are that are being presented going forward. Because candidly, I have not done, and I should do a lot more research on and kind of combing through all the additional subcommittee reports and things like that I should. But I think it's hard to hold people accountable without actually just summing up exactly what it is that we're doing. So I do think that should be the other side of the equation, which is there should be some preparation of, some one pagers. Maybe they take more than one page. Maybe it's a few highlights so that it's clear that people actually understand what these subcommittees are doing, so that way then they know when they see information why it is that they should participate. So I think you kind of have to take a little bit step further, and I think that would be really effective in making sure everyone's participation and we start to hear more other voices. Because candidly, right now, if someone asked me what the subcommittees were working on, I couldn't summarize them. And it'd be really nice to be able to have some very easy materials that would actually give me the ability to do that.
I appreciate that. And we will own and take responsibility for that. As we get these final sets of ideas, Perry and I are already working on providing some tools in terms of graphics and short links and things that can be shared on social media or in emails. But I hear your point that having to filter through pages of ideas can be cumbersome. So what I will take on over the next few weeks as we get all of the ideas together is putting together the short form versions of it. And it'll probably look like one page of big picture themes for all of the committees, and then a one pager for each of the committees. But I appreciate you raising it, and we will make that happen. Julie.
Yeah, when I first heard they were going to use this Engage Door thing, I was like, oh God, a government website that's going to be impossible to use. But I've actually found it surprisingly good, because you don't have to sign, you can just click, you don't have to sign in. But I like the idea of a one pager. My thought is good luck doing that with the legal one, because lawyers are constitutionally incapable of doing things on one page.
Your words, not mine, but I am the son of a lawyer who used to mark up the contracts that I had paid him to write for me just a few months ago. So I know that pain, and you're right. Our lawyers have been phenomenal on that committee and phenomenal in sending me their four-page short thoughts on my one paragraph. So we will work on that. I think you're right. I think COTA is going to be a tough one. Here are the conversations I want to now have. The last one is going to be the stakeholder engagement. So we've captured these thoughts, but we're going to dig into it at the end. There's two big questions that I have for this group that I'm going to spend most of my time listening to you on this. Number one, my first question is going to be, what is success? And then my second discussion we're going to have is, how do you all want to balance, or do you, the idea of bold, aspirational, disruptive ideas with pragmatic, we can get broad support for? I don't have an opinion I do think you all need to hear from one another. So whether we're fully aligned or at least understanding why we as a majority are going to go a direction. But my first question to each of you, and Michael, I'm going to go to you first. I want to know, and you can pick on the broad, you can address the full landscape of everything we're doing. You can speak to the life of an individual with a disability or anyone in Colorado or a specific committee. But my question is, what is success? If we get this right, what's changed a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever time horizon? But what is success for all of you as an executive committee with this task force?
Thank you, Barrick. Michael Stone speaking. It's kind of funny. I almost wanted Rep Ortiz to speak first. I mean, truth be told, we're here because you, Rep Ortiz, had the courage to make this happen. You fought for this. You have an idea of what success looks like. Part of the way that I would answer it has much to do with following that lead. While I certainly have my thoughts personally, for one is that if we were to fast forward, say a year from now, and we're looking back, that there's a world that those of us coming from those of us who identify with having a disability are not feeling that everything is an uphill battle, that in our daily lives, that we're not constantly having to ask for these things. It's just there. It's that when anything is designed, it's very thoughtful and to be very specific. I'll give you one example, that all of the municipalities in their planning departments that they are held accountable for doing it right from the beginning. So not that anything that there aren't these afterthoughts. Oh, we didn't really think of this. We actually thought we were compliant, but we'll try to get it right next time. And that's something that I think most of us hear on a daily basis. So success. Gosh, I mean, honestly, this could be a topic that I think I could probably speak on for days. But everywhere in every facet of life, whether or not it's education, employment, anybody who's ever looked at the rate of disability and what that means to unemployment, to the sense of somebody who doesn't feel that they're a productive member of society, but has the desire to, but finds these barriers in every aspect of where they look, and where it's this constant fight, that our level of success comes when we've been able to ease that pain, that the world, as you've said, that all the hard work isn't stuck in a binder and put away on someone's desk, that this is first and foremost when the people, at least of this state, consider that before any decision is made, that they have this notion of what can I do to make a situation in life, whatever it may be, where I'm helping everyone and hurting no one, and where we're forcing a pause, where somebody actually asks themselves the question, well, wait a minute, who's being left behind here, and what can I do about it? And so getting that in front of everyone, for that matter, and see how it's implemented into daily decision making, I think that's how I would define a success. I don't feel that should be aspirational. Anybody who's ever found themselves with a new perspective, whether or not they get a diagnosis. I've made this statement before. I believe that there's two kinds of people: those who currently identify with having a disability, and the people who haven't gotten there yet. At some point, life is going to humble everyone, and then they're going to have that perspective. And by that time, quite often, it's too late for them to do anything about it. But we're in that position where we could actually do something about it, and do something about it today. And so, to me, that's the only way that this is successful, is that not only are these words heard, but they're implemented, and people are actually held accountable. That if you are, that we want this, I want this world to understand that accountability does matter. It's not something that's an antiquated concept. That no, I'm in a position where I actually can do something about it, and therefore I have the responsibility to do something about it. And it shouldn't be that the person who's sort of waiting in the wings to have to beg for it. With Rep. Ortiz example, it shouldn't have to come down to somebody having to come in after the fact and saying, hey, is there an ASL interpreter here? No. That should be there front and center, and it's a privilege to be able to provide that for it, and change that way of thinking. And I hope this sets the tone for what, obviously we're going to put all of this into specifics. I've mentioned this before, and I think we all have our own perspective of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I mean, the mere fact that that many people don't even necessarily know what that stands for. I hear the word handicap day in and day out, and I don't even think people necessarily understand that. But it's a good example. What's on parking signs, those accessible parking signs? What exactly is out there for people to learn from? However, making this this notion front and center in all of our daily lives. I kind of forgot where I was going with that, and I apologize. I kind of got sidetracked by it. But I think that just understanding what that means and what a privilege it is to just do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And hopefully that in fact helps this. I mean, obviously I'd probably need to come back to me on this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody else has to say.
Thank you, Michael. And, as I listen to you, two big things come to mind. One, this is not the task force on the rights of businesses or government officials serving Coloradans with disabilities. This isn't the task force on the rights of mayors who don't want to or mayors who do want to. This is the task force on the rights of Coloradans with disabilities. And that will always be our North Star as facilitators. That said, there are also what success is for the Coloradans with disabilities, and there's what is success for the government officials who may have different requirements, or the private sector, and what their awareness and understanding is. But I'm very clear on what the legislative intent is here. Mr. Ortiz, and I know you could probably give us an hour. I'm going to ask for a few minutes on
I'll be much more concise.
But the big picture. Yeah.
So the bottom line, so let's start with different tiers. The first one is that success to me looks like, what's the state going to do to implement full compliance of a 34-year-old law? No carrots when it comes to that. That has been law for 34 years. What is the state going to do? What are these task forces going to do to implement the full intent of a 34-year-old law? That's priority one. That's priority one for whether this task force is successful or not. The next thing that happens after that is, how do we move towards full equity, full participation when it comes to different areas that have been identified by the task force, right? Specifically using the bills that were sacrificed to make this task force as baseline. That has to be the measure of success. How are we making housing more accessible? How are we doing that? How are we tangibly making it, and making sure that there's a plan? I mean, the subcommittees could offer whatever viable, like in their mind is a viable, realistic plan, but it's up to our job to take that raw material and create a cohesive long-term plan into achievable bites, and then also an accountability piece on the back end. That needs to be stated very clearly. That is what success looks like for me, is one, enforcing a 34-year-old law, and then two, looking at these recommendations and making sure that they are answering the baseline of what the original legislation was, and then asking ourselves, is this securing equity of opportunities for Coloradans with disabilities? Is this presenting tangible steps to get there? And if not, how are we going to polish that up and then present that forward? That is what success looks like for me.
Thank you. I think that's very clear, and I appreciate that. Let me go to Julie, and then Kirsten, and then Mark on behalf of the LG. Julie, what is success for our work together, and what comes out of this committee?
Well, when you ask that, the vision statement of Colorado Cross Disability Coalition is that people with all types of disabilities will achieve financial, political, and social equality. And then we define what those mean. And financial equality means that as a community, we are not all living in poverty and have an opportunity for upward mobility. Political equality means we're represented at all levels and branches of government, and social equality means that we're free to participate in the communities we desire and have access to quality housing, education, employment, and medical care. That's success.
Thank you. We may borrow some of your language. Kirsten, would love your thoughts on what is success for us as a task force.
I think I need a little bit more time for me to actually say out loud and articulate what I think that answer is for myself.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Mark, from the LG's perspective, channeling her, and I know, again, full disclosure, I shared with Mark so he could share with the LG. This was a question I was going to put to the floor.
Great. Thanks, Peric. So again, this is Mark, Chief of Staff for Lieutenant Governor Primavera. So I think I'll kind of start with a top line portion of it. Lieutenant Governor is pretty clear that success for her, and this is kind of the long-term aspirational, is that Colorado is the most accessible state in the country and the best home for individuals with disabilities. And that's where she kind of left it as very clear, direct kind of vision statement for kind of really where she sees this. But then with that, I think kind of going into the conversations for the task force of really thinking, I think, Peric, like you captured at the beginning, of that really effective capturing of what is the problem statement that we're working on engaging. Then from there, really being able to articulate what is that aspirational end state, which I think I just provided what Lieutenant Governor says. I've appreciated the other members of the task force sharing theirs, but kind of that aspirational end state, and then having some clear, actionable recommendations that can be pursued to really move towards implementation of that. And I think that would be really what we would identify as, again, that kind of high level aspiration. I know the amazing discussions that the subcommittees have had around aspirational work. So laying out problem statement, aspirational end statement or end state, and then engaging what are those actionable steps that we can really take to pursue that.
Thanks, Mark. Just so everybody knows, we're at 4:25. My intention is to spend the next 15 minutes on my next question, which is how you all are going to approach balancing, if you are going to, aspiration and pragmatism. And then we'll spend the final 15 minutes talking stakeholder engagement. Just to offer a little foundation and background, and this will not come out of your 15 minutes for discussion. These groups, as everybody's heard, we have pushed folks to be as aspirational as possible. In those conversations, without fail, one person here or there, whether it's a member of the public or a member of a subcommittee, has said some version of, is that realistic? Can we do that on that time frame? Is that fair? We have very intentionally not answered that question. I'm guiding the subcommittees to be aspirational and focus on that end state. What I want to bring to all of you, and I'll invite folks to raise your hands and join in where you would like to, is as an executive committee, talk to me about the types of recommendations you want to put forward. We have had some that are extremely disruptive and maybe controversial, whether that's removing caps or we had a member recently suggest, well, if you really want to get the government to do everything it's supposed to, eliminate sovereign immunity for all governments and government officials. It's an interesting concept. It is tough sometimes for me to set my political strategist hat aside and talk about the prospects for it. The good news is I get to put that on all of you in this conversation. As I said at the top, what we're going to bring you is the problem statement and the North Star end result. What I would like to have a conversation about is, what do you all want to put forward? Do you want to put forward as your recommendation just the North Star at one end of the spectrum? At another end of the spectrum, what you are highly confident you can get 99% of the legislators to agree to? Do you want to find a point in the middle, or do you want to say, this is the North Star you must move to in this short number of years, and you must immediately take actions on these things? So how much, I guess, ultimately in legislative parlance, do you want to be counting votes before you put your ideas together, versus how much do you want to set that North Star or that other ultimately pragmatic? And I saw Julie's hand go up first, and then Rep. Ortiz. So I'll invite you into the conversation in that order, and I hope everyone will join in. This isn't a right or a wrong answer. I really want members to hear from one another how you're thinking about the role of this task force in being bold, disruptive, or calculating. Julie.
Well, so first of all, we don't need to ever get 99% of the legislators. We need to get 33, 18, and 1. That's the calculus. So I don't care about getting 99%. I care about passing the bill. I'm a fan of bold ledge decks with pragmatic bills, but knowing that what we introduce is on the bolder end, but knowing, bills compromise, they move as you go through the process. So knowing maybe what our line in the sand is, like what's the compromise we don't go past, but be bold in our ledge deck, and but not, again, saying we're going to eliminate sovereign immunity. That's a non-start. Like I would not suggest something. I mean, even though I personally would love that, I would really, really love that. Boy, that would make my life wonderful. It will get vetoed. I mean, it's a non-starter. So I don't, or something that we know is going to have, a $5 billion fiscal note is a non-starter. So let's look at what we can get past, but again, not just say like, well, what can we do that no one's going to object to? That's going to be probably useless. Like we need, but I do think we should be somewhat pragmatic, because otherwise, doing bold bills that are never going to get anywhere is a strategy for when you're trying to get to something else. I mean that's what the anti-abortion movement did for years while they were getting their way to purchase a Supreme Court. I mean, that's so like that, but it was never to get the bill passed. That was never their goal. Our goal is to get a bill passed. So I think that it's important that we, that we do put something that has a chance. It doesn't mean we can't push, but that's my thought. But I think the ledge deck should be really bold, because when it gets to be that isn't part of the law, but when it comes to get enforcement in court, that's what gets looked at.
Julia, I really appreciate all of those thoughts. And if you've been on the subcommittees, you have undoubtedly heard me tell them, I have never seen the legislature make a bill more bold as it goes through the amendment process. So I appreciate your point there. Rep. Ortiz, this comes from the negotiation that you had to deal with, and you're the one on this call that sits in that seat. What are your thoughts on that balance, if at all, with the big note that Julie said straight up, this is not about bills for negotiating something we didn't ask for. This is about getting bills passed.
Yeah, it's got to be outcomes based for me. And so what do I mean by that? Let's take some of the ideas that that I think kind of speak into answering this question really well. There was an idea put forward by Ski Country to create an incentive, or not an incentive, but to encourage leaders within these different resorts or national parks or state parks to have to go through an adaptive, not have to, but optional, encourage them to go through a adaptive leadership course that is offered at DU and CU, right? So not only are we educating leaders that are making decisions at the table at these big areas, but we're also supporting our state and local universities because they have these amazing programs. Great idea. My role, as I see it as an executive committee member, would be to go a step further and start with aspirational certain positions, or they must at least have one individual that is required to go through this program. Full stop, leave it at that. And the only way that we would be open to not making it a requirement is if there's a check-in around measurable outcomes. Define what that is and check in around measurable outcomes. And if we're not getting the measurable outcomes, then make it a mandate where we allow it to be optional for a period of time, 5 years, 10 years, right? To go through the program, which is, I think, a year long, and then to allow to apply it for the professionals to apply it 3 to 5 years, I think is good. I'm sure that'll be negotiated. And then come back in a way to define what the measurable outcomes are, to come back and define what that is, who's investigating it, and like make that decision on whether we're getting the outcomes or not. And if not, to come back and then make it a mandate. Like that's, to me, that is an example of how we can be both aspirational and pragmatic. There's another example that I think speaks to this, is that we're getting extreme pushback from in mandating that ski resorts in Colorado, when they write up contracts with ski lift manufacturers, that in the contract, it says that they must consider federal ADA and the Colorado anti-discrimination law in their design to accommodate people with disabilities. We don't spell out specifics and don't hold them to that standard. We are just simply reminding them of a 30,000 foot viewpoint. Hey, these laws exist, also designed by that. Because I know for a fact that what is happening is resorts are saying, hey, we want to get more people up the mountain, so let's make a 6-pack or an 8-pack. Or hey, we're getting sued a lot because kids are falling off the lift, so design it to make it safer for kids. What they're not saying is, hey, we have disabled athletes that are also using this. Can you also keep that in mind? So that is an area where I will not budge. I will not move. That is such a small thing to put such a generic statement of what already exists in law and saying, hey, you should keep that, not in like, oh, you will be held accountable as a manufacturer, is that you should keep this in mind as you're designing ski lifts. And the fact that that is getting so much pushback in this example of where I will not budge, right? So like that is an area, those are two different examples of what I am looking to, and I hope that answers the question on what we need to be pushing for. And then a caveat off of that example of the contract, there was a discussion around, well, what about designs? Like, what about designs for this adaptive equipment? The way it gets characterized sometimes, it was almost like, well, these designers are just doing whatever they want. No, that's not what's happening. Okay, we have been designing for ski lifts as they have existed for 15 years. And there are actually updates to the equipment, like little things here and there. Like I saw on Kelly Brush's monoski rig, a piece of hard plastic that covered, you know, the part of the ski that binds or unbinds, because that's where we get caught. And that simple adaptation, I feel like, could be huge. But the recommendation that came from that discussion was, how about instead of putting everything on the ANSI B77 task force, what we do put on them is that they are responsible for creating a bridge between designers of adaptive equipment and ski lift companies. Because something else that came up on those discussions is we should give full power to B77, but the only disabled member on that task force talks about constantly how he gets not heard, ignored, marginalized by even executive directors of adaptive ski programs. And I am not going to name the name. I love these people to death, but their motivations are not the same. They're not the same. So trying to, in life, kind of give you guys an idea of where my thinking process is and where I'm okay budging, and like, all right, fine. If you don't want to make it a mandate, then let's define what measurable outcomes are, and then define a view, like a timeline where we review it. And if we're getting the outcomes, great, we don't have to go harder. But if we're not, then we should go harder.
Thank you, Rep. Ortiz. I think that was particularly powerful in setting out philosophically where you're coming. Here's some examples of how it plays out and some approaches to addressing it. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to go to Michael, and then Kirsten, and then Mark.
Thank you. Michael Stone speaking. You know, I always struggle with subjectivity and specific to what is aspirational, what is pragmatic. As I said, what is that line in the sand? It's very confusing when we're talking about enforcing a 34-year-old law, and consistent with that, anti-discrimination. So I'm not exactly certain why that's anything in that phrase as aspiration would be, what are we aspiring to there? Coupled with, okay, well, what's practical? And in Rep. Ortiz's examples are great ones, but I'd love to hear why in the last 15 years the answer was no. Why can't we do this? Where is that disconnect? If we know exactly what's happening, it can't just be dollars. If that's the case, being very, very specific, I mean, how much does just using the ski industry, because it seems like that's what and I don't want to pick on, because we have many more areas of concern in addition, but if it comes down to dollars, okay, well, let's talk about that. They all have reserves. They have capital improvements there. This is part of their annual budget. They're very aware of this. When ADA rolled out, that they addressed that, and that basically, for example, that if you're talking about physical assets and or businesses, had to have some aspects of reserves to pay for this. So let's just say if they're doing $1 million of revenue, that they have 5% or so of that, accruing annually for these things. In many of these cases, the books are open, and we can have it. I'm trying to understand where that line is what's practical and what exactly is aspirational. Because if you cite the examples that we're giving, none of these really should be aspirational, unless, of course, you're using Julie's examples of phrasing of what you said earlier about sovereign immunity, and of course some unrealistic multi-billion-dollar budget that just isn't going to happen. In many of these cases, I'm thinking that this is all very, what I would call, I use this phrase a lot, low-hanging fruit. Where exactly is that stop? And I think it would be helpful, and to be very specific, to hear. We're talking about stakeholders. I want to hear what exactly is the problem. What are the answers? And if Rep. Ortiz or anybody else has heard this before, to know exactly what where these areas are. I used the example earlier of for example, in municipalities and city planners, for example, as it relates to that. Well, I'd like to know where exactly is that disconnect, because that would help for me to define what exactly is aspirational and what is practical. To me, that we're just asking them to do their job, and so what's missing from that equation. So I'm not so sure that I mean, I could probably go through and cite examples on many of these, but I think I need a little bit of specific definition here, because I am struggling, believe it or not, with those words. Because in most cases, I don't feel that any of this is aspirational. But if it's not practical because it's not going to pass a certain legislation, then I think that those of us that aren't living in that world really need to understand what that is, and in an effort to be truly effective here. And hopefully that's helpful.
That is, Michael. Thank you. Both in your answers and the things you surfaced that we need to discuss to get some more answers and alignment. And so I'm thinking, in addition to the strategic conversation about how to advance the recommendations, part of that in our next call will involve what are the sources of objection, because I think you make a very good point that I'm going to take to heart, that there is nothing aspirational in complying with a 35-year-old law. So I appreciate you highlighting that. Kirsten, let me go to you, and then Mark, and then I'm going to pivot us to stakeholders engagement. Kirsten, your thoughts on the idea of balancing pragmatic and possible with the aspirational, and moving towards bills that will pass.
I mean, I just have to be candid. This is my first time participating in such a process like that. So I don't, I'm still trying to get up to speed enough with kind of where it is that the recommendations themselves are going.
Yep.
And also my knowledge base. I mean, I think obviously, I've often wondered why I was chosen to be on this task force. And I think one of the reasons why is just to offer, some insight and some thought around some of the challenges. I do happen to know a lot about affordable housing, and I can fully appreciate the objectives that have been expressed. I can also appreciate, because I have been a part of deals trying to get an affordable housing project done, and they're difficult. So I think one of the things is just going to be making sure that whatever it is that we're making recommendations that are being put forward are not seen as somehow creating an additional burden on areas that are already really difficult to get done. I mean, affordable housing is one of our biggest problems right now that's facing the metro area, right? So I think the job of the task force is to, one, be really thoughtful about what it is that's being put forward, and making sure that we're not just saying that we talk to a lot of people, that we're actually making sure that we talk to the right people and have real dialogue and true discussions and understandings about what the impacts of the recommendations are going to be.
I appreciate that, Kirsten. And full transparency, the reason I wanted to have this conversation today about what is the ideology or the philosophy that each of you is approaching this work and us forming our recommendations, I wanted you to hear from one another in hopefully a non-tense set of circumstances. We are going to, in the coming months, have some very tough discussions on what may be contentious issues. I'm going to come back to those of you who have sat in on my meetings. I have 10 different norms that I ask people to abide by. To me, the most important one is to disagree without being disagreeable. And so I wanted to surface philosophically, ideologically, how you're all approaching this. Because in the next couple of months, there are going to be discussions we'll have where you disagree in the strongest way with your colleagues on this task force. And I want to invite you to do exactly that, to feel invited and in fact obligated to share your opinions, and to do so in a way that shows respect to your colleagues, so that we understand where we're all coming from and we get to that point. Mark, your thoughts on how we approach this balance, and then Rep, I'll get you back in.
Great, thanks, Barrett. This is Mark, Chief of Staff for Lieutenant Governor Primavera again. I think a couple things that I would say is, one, going into a comment, Barrett, I think that you shared, and then it kind of speaks to me after the comments that Michael shared, was also just the importance of helping to define the problem and helping to kind of like provide or articulate the problem within the report, I think is important. As we're then talking about how do we kind of lay out both kind of like what we see as that aspirational piece, while concurrently also talking about like what are those actual kind of immediate recommendations or the things to be pursued on. So I think that that is something that stands out to me about the importance of really defining that problem, and then kind of what we see as those goals. I think the other piece that kind of stands out to me is for those of you who have spent a lot of time with Lieutenant Governor Primavera, you've heard her kind of share a line from her days back when she did a lot of work in the customer service field of don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. And really thinking about that kind of within this space as well, as we're then thinking about it of how are we making sure that we have then recommendations that allow for kind of that, tell us what you can do, and kind of how we're able to move that forward. So I think that that would be something that I would kind of capture of as we're thinking about this, to be able to define what that problem is, and then to be able to talk through where we have those opportunities. Like, again, what is that vision? What is that end state? And then tell us what we can do to really move that forward.
Thanks, Mark. Representative.
Yeah, I got to hit on Mark's comments, which was perfect. That is how we disagree without being disagreeable, is don't tell me what you can't do, tell me what you can do. And I think the example that I cited earlier on ASL interpretation, just like, well, we're not legally required, caused a lot of discussion. And then I don't know if it was leadership that was like, hey, this is not the right thing to do. The tune changed. It was all of a sudden, hey, we can definitely get ASL interpretation in the committee, especially when your bill is being heard. but probably when all the bills are being heard. And then we can also probably get it for part of the forward, right? Like I am not asking for perfection. That is unattainable. That is not, that's not how you move mountains. That's not how you move forward. I am asking for a reasonable attempt and for solutions. I'm asked, tell me what you can do, and I can work around that. If you're saying, well, I don't want to put this in contracts at all, well, then what do you want me to? And give me a reasonable alternative. If you're saying, well, let's put it on B77. B77 has had 20 years to do this, and I know of a member that is being marginalized. The answer is no. And I'm not going to be disagreeable, but I am going to be firm. Where I can't help it. Look, it gets personal when people say ableist stuff. That is my line where, and I will work on turning it into a teachable moment instead. If someone says, hey, you're going to drive out business, I will say, hey, teachable moment. That talking point has been used against community with a disability for 30 years. What else do you got? What else do you have? How can we soften the blow? Talk to me about timelines. Talk to me about incentives. Talk to me about how in your estimation can we not drive out business without doing nothing or a symbolic nothing burger, right? I will always be tenacious. Y'all know me. I will always push people, and I will always challenge people. The disagreeing, we shouldn't be afraid to disagree, because that's when I think we get to good ideas, is through some type of combat or conflict. What matters is that there are rules of engagement, that we don't make it personal, right? That's what matters, is that there are rules of engagement as we're pushing through here. And because, Barrick, you know this, we've gotten into some heated discussions too, but there's not a day that I wouldn't sing you and Carrie's praises, right? It is the outcome and the attempt that I care about. That's what matters the most. So
I appreciate everything you're saying. And I think, folks, we've spent coming on a year together, and I think people have to continue to assume the best intentions of the others, no matter how passionate they are or how much you disagree with what they're saying. And as the representative said, I'm not just a muck stirrer. I'm trying to get to powerful ideas, which means I'm going to push you to disagree. I want you to disagree because I want you to test each other's thinking. In the last 11 minutes, I wish I had more. I'm going to pivot us to the stakeholder engagement. And to be very clear, to me, there is the stakeholder engagement right now to get input on the ideas. We will want to get stakeholder engagement on the recommendations that you ultimately surface and put forward. And I will proffer that you're going to want a stakeholder engagement and a coalition building strategy for the report that comes out. That's going to be a couple conversations where I need your help right now. We have a lot of ideas up on Engage Dora. I think we have about 8 comments so far. I'm going to pick up and act on everything you have requested. We had members ask for graphics and short links. We're making them this week and we'll circulate them. We've started a Google document where people can give us, whether it's social media handles or contacts or just names of folks they want us to track down and ask them to spread it. I need to ask everyone to reach out to your own networks. I hear the point about making it digestible. We will make these one-pagers. I also am hearing everything we've talked about for the last 75 minutes. We need to get people's support and objections now so we understand where they're coming from, either so we can revise and adapt and incorporate smart thinking, or so you all can be prepared for what the objections to good ideas all around may be, whether those objections are coming from the business community, government officials, or communities of persons with disabilities who just don't like the idea. I want you to hear all of the objections, all of the supports, and all the ways to make these stronger. So I'm going to ask all of you, what can we do? What can you do? And what can our subcommittee members do to generate interest? Kelly and I were looking at Engage Dora. They've got hundreds of comments in response to things like HOA rules and the Public Utilities Commission. We're not getting that interest right now. I know some folks would rather wait till there's bills to support or oppose them. What are your thoughts on how we get people to engage with these ideas now? Rep Ortiz, jump in, please.
Yep. I come at this from what I know, and that is, I know how to organize community. I know how to get people to show up. Part of that is utilizing my offices to and of course I am going to do it from my perspective, right? I will utilize call time to reach out to community living with a disability. Because like if we think we're just going to post on social media and people are going to all of a sudden flock in, that is not how that works. That is ineffective. That is not how that works. Social media is great as a supplement to the real hard work of making phone calls, sending text messages, having a strategy for when you do what, like sending out a Warno email 2 weeks before, and then doing call time 10 days before, and then shooting reminder text messages the day before, right? Like you have to have a strategy on how you're going to engage community and make sure they show up. And if you look at my town halls, if you look at, you know, from legislative preview day to disability rights advocacy day, part of those successes are built around that kind of hard work. So I'm speaking from what I know, like that's how we will engage. I want, you know, those that, you know, that have been traditional opposition to disability rights to come to the table and tell us, but I don't think that should be my job to do, you know, lend my offices and do my work to get them to come, right? Like I don't have any answers. Maybe that doesn't work on, you know, on the Chamber of Commerce or the business community. Maybe that's something that you and Carrie can do to ask them, hey, what works for you guys when you're building out events? Like what works out to get engagement when you all are doing those things?
No, I appreciate that. And we will follow up because as I think all of you know, we've had conversations with the Denver Chamber, with the Colorado Chamber, with the numbers. We will follow up with all of them. Rep. Ortiz, one question for you. When is the best timing for you to do that kind of aggressive organizing outreach? Is it like mid-September when we have all of the ideas from all of the committees there so that it's hitting critical mass?
I think, I mean, my perspective, and you guys can offer pushback, I think once we get those one-pagers done, because again, if we make it simple for people to get a snapshot idea of what's going on, and if they're policy nerds or like love digging into things, creating short links where they can dive more into that information, or if they can look at that snapshot and operate it, right? Like, I think once the like short digestible one fact sheets are done and like the short links are done, that's when I think it'll be most powerful and effective, because then we can point to something and say, hey, I'm not just calling you to annoy you. I'm not just calling to say hi. Check out this product. We want your perspective, get your input. And like from in my arena, it's also knowing when events are, right? So like the first Thursday at Brewability, Pasco hosts a big event that doesn't just get caregivers and disabled folks, but gets entrepreneurs that live with a disability or entrepreneurs that serve community, right? Like there are events that we can then go to and people that we can go to drum up support, to get attention on it, whether it's attending the actual meetings or to look at what's being put out there so they can give feedback on their own time at their own point, right? And like, I don't know if that like extra step necessarily is on like you and Carrie. I know I'll speak for myself. I won't speak for Julie or any other organization out there, but like, I know I can do that work. I love going to Brewability anyways and hanging out with my community, but like, I don't know what that looks like for the business community. I mean, I kind of do, but I mean, again, I get paid $42K a year. I'm not going to spend my time as we are finishing special session and I'm engaging my disabled folks to then go to these high dollar functions for the business community and say, hey, what do you think about, you know, weighing in on this stuff? Like I look at that as someone else's job. That can be, you know, those representatives from the subcommittee or the executive committee's job, and then getting with them and seeing what they think is best.
Thank you. And I'm going to be really brief because I want to get Julie in. Carrie is going to add a column or a field on the spreadsheet that we sent around if you want to name events. I can't be in the role of advocate, but I'm happy to dedicate a number of our staff hours if there are events, particularly online, that we can attend, and to the extent we can do them in person, we're happy to share the work of this task force and the ideas that are coming forward, if that will be helpful. And we'll prioritize the one-pagers. Julie, your thoughts or asks or ideas for the group or for Carrie and me?
No, I agree that I think, you know, it's got to be calls and that kind of stuff. You know, again, the people that I know or people in the disability community, I know some of the lobbyists for some of these other groups, but not well. You know, I'd be happy to, you know, make a few calls, but again, I don't know that they're going to listen to me. But I do agree that we should, once we have the fact sheets and we have everything in kind of a neat bundle. We've been sending out the Engage Dora thing, but clearly, you know, and we've been talking about it at all of our gatherings, but it isn't, it is, if we've only gotten 8 comments, then we're clearly not messaging it well. So I do think that that would be helpful to have the fact sheets and to have, you know, kind of some here. And I also think because there's not a deadline, I know that often, and I'm guilty of this too. If someone says, hey, we want your ideas and there isn't a deadline, I'll say, oh yeah, I'm going to do it. And then it doesn't get done. So I do think like, even if it's a soft deadline, but to say like, if we put it out mid-September to say, hey, we need it in 45 days or whatever, even if it's long, because short deadlines don't work either. Then people say, oh, they don't really want to hear from me. So, so I think that'll be helpful. But I do think it would be good to ask all of our subcommittee members to please reach out and to put in writing that this is the time, so that when we start hearing complaints during the session, that we have a list of everyone who was notified, and we're told this is the time. Obviously, anyone can go to a hearing and testify, but I think we're going to want to go to legislators and say, if you start to get complaints, here's all the work we did to reach out. And I don't know if there's, I mean, maybe the other thing that I just, this just popped in my head. I know there's a list of like every lobbyist. I'm wondering if we just send, if there's a way through the Secretary of State's office, could we just send something to all of them to say, hey, your clients might be interested in this. This is the time. And then there's not one lobbyist that hasn't heard. And obviously there's some that aren't going to care, that don't work on our issues, but that way no one, you know,
Yep.
no one can say they didn't know, because you know, I know that Dora has a way, or not Dora, Secretary of State, because as a registered lobbyist, I get stuff that says, hey, your reports due, you know, like your reports are due this day, or like the end of the year, like you've got to re-register. So I don't think they'll do it for a group, but I know that any citizen can go look at who the lobbyists are, because I've certainly used that list. So if there's a way to do that, I would suggest that.
I appreciate that suggestion. What we'll do is we'll work to make sure we'll work against this mid-September time window to get not just the one pages, but everything there, so it can be coordinated outreach with digestible information. We'll work with all of you on that. I'll work with Ginny on making sure we have all the materials together. If you all decide and give me the marching order, we certainly have close relationships with those. I think you all know that there's a handful of lobbying shops that represent a lot of the businesses, a lot of, whether it's tourism industry or the business community. And we know the folks at some of those big shops. If you tell us to reach out to them or to all of them, we're happy to do so. Michael, in 2 minutes, I'm curious if you have final words of guidance, wisdom, or asks on getting stakeholders engaged, in addition to what we're talking about a coordinated window with digestible information about the ideas.
Thank you. Michael Stone speaking. I've been actively working on that as an answer. You know, one thing I keep going to the low hanging fruit is once again, and when we define stakeholders, I'm just gonna, because you only gave 2 minutes on this. It seems to me, and this is that I am constantly, people that should know that this task force exists, that this bill has been passed, and so forth, do not. So and that's where my struggle is. I'm wondering if there's a way that we can do a big push to truly inform people as to what's happening. This is just such a rare opportunity, and to make sure, whether or not it's our Centers for Independent Living, the ADA coordinators in various municipalities and counties, to really join in and sort of help us help them. And so I have quite a long list, actually, and I'm going to have to find a way to maybe connect with Carrie and see what we could do to tackle this. Because my feeling is that we're not reaching many of the people that we should be reaching, and really should be advocating on our behalf, if you will. Does that help at all?
It does. And let me also apologize for only giving you 2 minutes, because this turned into such a robust discussion that we're already just past 5. Yeah. But your point is well taken. And yes, please do reach out to Carrie or to me. And what we're going to do is put together kind of a strategic outreach framework and plan for this work in response to everything we've heard from you. We'll put together the one-pagers, working with Ginny and her team. We'll put together all of the ideas so they're ready in one go. And then what we'll try to do is put together some talking points that can be used in your outreach, whether that's to press to tell the story, whether that's to constituency groups, other advocacy groups, or the general public. I recognize part of the challenge has been, as Julie has said, there hasn't been an urgency. There's been a, hey, this group is meeting, do you want to weigh in? I think if we can do this consolidated packaging of the ideas and a quick timeline of what's happening with these ideas and why people should care, whether that's the business community, individuals with disabilities, or professional organizations or advocacy groups. So we will put all of that together and look at what will end up being a mid-September through late October strategic outreach plan that we will lean on all of you to execute. With that, one, I thank you for running 2 minutes over with me. With half of our group, we ended up using the full time for what I hope felt like a productive conversation. Mr. Vice Chair, I will leave it to you to close us out with any guiding words.
No, I mean, just want to express the gratitude. It's not like we're getting paid big bucks to be on the executive committee or these subcommittees. You know, and even though you and Carrie are contracted, like I couldn't have asked for a better group to kind of lead the charge and mediate this and kind of drive it forward. It has been a joy to see it grow and deepen the work that we're trying to do here. There's some really, and just if anyone is, and the millions that are listening online right now, I'm sure, it has been so amazing to see the push for disability rights here in Colorado change and grow over the past 5 years to where, you know, we're setting up and hiring an executive director for the CEDU office, right? A hub, the first of its kind, that not only is going to be helping coordinate between departments and agencies, between the legislature, the, you know, the courts, that's going to be that focal point of contact, but is going to be granting money to be able to serve our community, right? Like this is, and then just the amazing talent that is on this task force, even those voices that, to be honest, that sometimes annoy me, like that sharpen me and that make me better. Like we need those perspectives and we're ready to do the work. So as soon as we get ready with the one pagers, and even though I say it's not my job to reach out to Chamber of Commerce, like I'm here to serve everyone. So if Carrie and Barrick ask me to do that work, I'm going to do that work because we only get better ideas the more seriously we get those with that technical expertise involved. So just a lot of gratitude, a lot of joy, excited to see, and a little nervous, but excited to see what comes up here in the next month. I have faith in definitely in the executive committee, all the subcommittees. I'm excited to see what happens. So keep doing it, guys.
Fantastic. Thank you all. We'll be in touch by email and we'll see you same time next month. Thanks all.